How can GPU miners give back? How can GPU miners, give back to the projects that they mine from?
Now, I have a lot of strong words about DAOs, and to summarize, DAOs suck.
You deal with the laziness, the complacency, everything like that.
So that is a way where community members can rally around and have their voice heard.
If you can't do that, then that's a clear signal for me that, you guys aren't really supporting the project.
Right? So like Ruben has masternodes. That's cool. That is something to aspire to do. Let's say I mine these coins, and I mine them up and I stack them up and my goal is to get a masternode, and then I get the masternode, and then I'm contributing in another way, and that is a way to add some utility. And then with that masternode, let's say I get voting rights, I become a part of the ecosystem. I mine my way into a masternode, and then I've essentially mined myself into a bigger voice in the community. Things like that are really cool, and I can really appreciate those, and they all fall under the umbrella of passive income. People who like mining, they like passive income most likely. Masternodes, staking, yield farming, right? These are all like, in a way, passive income. And that's how you appeal with different products to the same audience. And it's a lot of those things that have contributed to a lot of success, on these different blockchains. If these projects don't have that kind of infrastructure in place, like everything you mentioned, then we have the buy and sell. I think I don't mean to always hate on ravencoin, but like I just think it's funny. Like everyone, like, the ravencoin has assets, and I'm like, what do they do? Like why do I want an asset? And it's just I still haven't heard. If you have one, I'd love to hear it, but I just still haven't heard an interesting argument. Like, I want ravencoin to succeed. I think it's cool that it's mineable, right? I think it's cool, but just what good does an asset do me when I can go on to Ethereum and I can make a decentralized trade? I can yield farm, I can buy an NFT, I can do all this stupid degen stuff, and whatever else. And where's that on these other chains if they want to be compared in a competitor?
So you touched on something pretty important, which is Firo with masternodes, right? Mine your coins and then run a masternode, get a voice in the community. Now, I have a lot of strong words about DAOs, and to summarize, DAOs suck. Most people misunderstand them, and wisdom of the crowds do not work when you are designing a highly technical protocol. I mean, again, most people struggle to set up a miner. They should not be deciding, what is the tech direction on a protocol. But still, feeling like you're part of a community is pretty important, and there are other ways to give people a voice than having them make product and tech decisions. So what ravencoin needs to do to succeed actually isn't utility. Utility has to be developed by the community. ravencoin has a really strong community right now, and what they need to do to protect it is something similar to what Ruben's been proposing with the tokenomics proposal, which is reducing their block reward and splitting a percent into a community ecosystem fund to power all of these dApps, to basically fund all of these dApps and these utility projects. Wrap it up in Quadratic Funding so that all of the miners get a voice. And now they can actually vote on which projects get funded, which projects would be the most likely to contribute value to the ecosystem. That's what ravencoin needs to do to succeed. And if it does it before this big surge of GPU hash rate comes in, they'll be able to survive, because now you actually have a sink for those coins. It goes into the developers and into the ecosystem. And ecosystem funding acts like a beacon to developers. It says, come over, come build on our chain. There's money here available for you. Put in the work and you will be able to make a living.
Basically, okay, MEV, minor extractable value, it is not different in proof of work and proof of stake, right? So like if you want to call it, block proposer extractable value, like it sounds less sexy, but we can call it BPEV instead of MEV, who cares? But
so this is a problem in both proof of work and proof of stake.
Yes. So the basic idea is that if you have the ability to choose which transactions go into a block and in what order, then you have the ability to like take advantage of that position for economic gain in a lot more ways than just collecting transaction fees, right? Like for example, there's decentralized exchanges on chain like Uniswap. And like let's say the price of ETH versus USDC was 2,700 the previous block, but then there was a bit of a market drop and now it's 2,680, where you can go on Uniswap and you can just like gobble up the entire part of the automated order book that's like between 2,700 and 2,680, right? And then at the same time you like run a bot and you buy some ETH back at 2,680 and you've just like made about $10 of profit, right? So $10 times whatever the depth is, right? So there's lots of little things like that. There's also things that involve like front running other people's transactions. So one example of this would be that if someone sends a transaction that says, like, I don't know, buy me 5 ETH for whatever price that you can get, but with a maximum of let's say $15,000, then you can go and like you can put a transaction right in front of that transaction, and you can like buy up that ETH first, and then you resell it to him at $15,000 minus one. So there's,
and then you get to make a little bit of money that way.
Exactly. So there's a lot of these different like arbitrage, front running, back running, these different tricks that allow block proposers to
get some percentage on top, like overhead.
Exactly.
And then slowly Ravencoin will be able to introduce something similar to MEV once they start getting all of that transaction volume from GPU miners. That'll add in more liquidity, it'll add in more funding. That's part of why I think, Ruben, with Firo, we don't talk much about how important it is to reduce the block reward going to individual miners, because it's quite obvious they're not contributing back into the ecosystem and instead have a pot of money. I do stress that it shouldn't be controlled by individual community members right now, because the community has proven that they don't really know how to allocate that. Instead, put it up into a matching pool and let people vote with their money. Quadratic voting, right? Quadratic funding. So you don't decide, and it's not 12 people in the community deciding what projects get funded and what don't, because that opens that up to bribery attacks and all sorts of things. Let each individual user of the Firo network vote. $1 per vote, $10 per vote. It's Gitcoin's model. Hell, even reach out to Gitcoin and just work on a platform with them. That would help the ecosystem quite a lot. You'll slowly see, yes, some miners might drop off because profits have decreased, but all of a sudden, again, it'll be like a beacon. Developers will come, they'll get exposed to your chain, they'll start thinking about new ways to utilize Firo, because now they can make a full-time living if they're good.
I think, like one of the things that especially people forget, that when they're saying like, why can't you be like Solana, why can't you be like Avalanche, why can't you fund an ecosystem, right? Obviously, I mean, Avalanche and Solana, obviously their ecosystems are growing, and obviously still not to the same level as Ethereum, but they also have huge portions of their supply also like earmarked for all these ecosystem funds, right? And in a way, how can a decentralized project like ours, where we're only getting like a small part of the block reward for development, compete with this hundreds of millions of dollars where there's just available for people to build on these chains, right? And obviously people would compare us, how about Monero, right? I mean, okay, Monero is kind of like an outlier, right? They have the community crowdfunding system. And I mean, for a project of that size, if you take a look at like how much is actually like really being done. It's not a lot. It's not. I have an absolute respect of what they are doing, and they've achieved quite a bit, but it's still nothing to the level of all these other centralized pre-allocated pre-sale coins, right? I mean, just like 1 or 2 years back, the Monero Research Labs was almost like decimated, right? They lost all their full-time researchers, and which kind of like shows that even for such, like a big project like Monero, decentralized funding models tend to always be underfunded, right? And that's why, like, with the community fund, obviously I don't know if it would work, but I feel like it's a worthwhile experiment, right? Because like, if miners, if they're just going to be mercenary, of course, obviously there's some outliers. Obviously some do contribute to the ecosystem, but the vast majority don't. And if all they're going to do is sell it on the exchange, I'd rather give this portion of money to someone who's going to try to do something for Firo. It doesn't have to be development. It can be just like translating, develop like building documentation, having guides, shilling, covering us on a podcast. Now there's money to reward the community to do that. And yes, it may be sold, but it has created something for the project. It's like, rather than trusting the miners to give back, now I'm like, this thing is going to give back anyway. It may be sold, but it has created something for the project. And I believe there's this economic theory where you can have inflation as long as that inflation is used to generate productive stuff. And I think that is kind of how we should see like community funding and things like that. Yeah, yes, it's inflation. Yes, we are creating coins for the community to use, but like, why should we be also giving it to miners, if they're not that providing that security that much anymore? And I'm not hating on miners. It's just a matter of thinking about how do we empower the community to like, feel as this they're part of the project. Because projects with a development fund, or like, block reward or dev tax, I've not seen a single project that has a dev tax where the community is like, I want to do something really great for the project, because they're like, developers are getting something, the core team's getting something. I don't, why should I do something? I think that's a very big problem with dev tax. I mean, it does give, like, like, it gave us the ability to build like really cool privacy protocols. It gave Zcash the ability to build like super great like Halo 2 and all of that. These are funded from the block rewards, but at the same time, it kind of, if you compare like the community of Zcash versus Monero, it's really different, right? Like, it's like a world of difference. So yeah.
The solution, though, is Monero has something it's not quadratic funding, but it's close to quadratic funding. It's the Monero, what is it? The Monero Community Fund?
The community crowdfunding system.
Got it. So that is a way where community members can rally around and have their voice heard. So the issue, dev tax isn't a problem. It is a tool, and like any tool, it just has to be used in the correct way. In Monero's case, while they don't have a dev tax, the community has an outlet for them to contribute funding, to get a social badge of honor, to feel good, to be contributing back to the project, and to be recognized for that. And that is what quadratic funding entails. If you look over on Gitcoin, it is an honor to be a judge in the Gitcoin grant ecosystem, but it's also, you get an NFT, you get badges, it's gamified in a way. It's fun to contribute, and then you get to brag. Like, you get bragging rights, which is nice.
That's what we're trying now. We're going to have like NFTs for contributors with special traits, or depending on what they contribute.
And so dev tax can be done correctly. You just need to have that outlet for the community. It can't just be, here's a wallet that all of the funds go to, and you as project steward get to decide what projects it gets allocated to. That's not the right way to handle it, which is where Zcash messed up.
I was just gonna say I completely agree with you on that, because I remember seeing that their dev tax, and then they have you can submit the grants, and they have like a centralized review board,
Yeah.
and it's a very slow turnaround time. And you compare that with Gitcoin and their quadratic funding, which is they've done such an incredible job with that overall. It's been phenomenal, and it's so cool. It's so fun. It's engaging. The donation periods are short. You get the funds in a quicker amount of time. You have to be. This is a very fast moving pace in the sector. Your funding is much more effective if it's quick too. And then, like you said, the way they gamified it, I've had a lot of fun participating with Gitcoin over the last 1 or 2 years. It's fun, and the matching mechanism is such an interesting way to be like, wow, like I literally gave this project $1, but through the funding, because they're so popular, for my $1 they get an extra $50, and it really incentivizes you to contribute, because maybe I don't have much money, maybe I don't have many coins, but it's like that positive reinforcement thing again. It's like you're heavily rewarded for participating, even if that reward is distributed to what you're supporting. Like, that's still a reward, kind of like on your behalf. I've been a huge proponent of a percentage of the block reward going to proof of work projects, basically once I wrap my head around everything, because with no funding, you bleed out. And as we move forward in the crypto timeline, there's more projects than ever before. There's more money in the ecosystem than ever before. That means there's more VCs, there's more backers, there's more money being raised in sales, and there's just a whole lot of people with huge war chests. If you don't have any of that, you can't participate. Or I shouldn't say participate, you can't compete, right? So, if Ruben shows up with $200 million, and I'm like, hey, me and the, guys on the farm, we put together 20 grand, right? Like, now what? I mean, who do you think's gonna win? Ruben can be on every single crypto news site, TikTok, crypto YouTube, getting blasted across crypto Twitter, any crypto news, anything. He's got the budget for it. And it's not even a big deal. He blows that marketing budget, and then he still has a development budget. He's got the grant budget. He's got it, it's just literal firepower. And with, you compete against projects like that, and you don't have anything coming even close, you just get drowned out. I was just going to say that I think that every project needs a proper funding mechanism that also scales and is aligned with the project. So, taking a portion of those block rewards, is much better. Say like if you took 10% more of the block reward, but you distribute that in a good way, maybe that 10%, instead of going to miners that aren't doing anything, maybe it goes to miners who want to participate on a second level, and you just funded a new podcast, right? And it's your sponsorship that makes him be able to dedicate a day a week to it, right? Maybe he needs that financial incentive, and it's just hoping that just miners alone will have enough focus, efficiency, and drive to say mine enough coins, be like, what, I mined all this, it's going great, I'm going to dedicate some of this to starting a podcast, and dedication of them for being mineable. It's just, you just don't see enough actors or I shouldn't say actors, you just don't see enough participants.
Yeah. And so, Ruben, back to Firo, yes, you should have, a community fund coming out of the block rewards, and absolutely the core team needs a percentage as well, because there's one thing we've learned from Ethereum: Gitcoin does not work well for client development. Client development is not milestone based, it's not rapid, it's slow, it's clunky. It is the kind of talent you need for client development is just different. And so the core team needs to be aligned with the growth of the protocol and the ecosystem, right? And I think the other thing you need to communicate to the community is, when you reduce the amount of money that's going straight to miners, you reduce the sell pressure on the entire market and the entire network. And so naturally, that's going to allow price to recover and price to appreciate. Because right now, you've got massive sell pressure. No, people are going to hate me for saying this, but when I say no utility, I mean there's no dApps right now. It's just buy or sell. So you need to curb your rewards right now to match that buy and sell. And as you slowly build up utility, which your community will do if they have funding allocated to them, and which you will do as a core team if you have dedicated funding, then slowly you can start increasing the percentage if you need to, or what will just happen is Firo will, become 2x, 3x, 100x what it currently is now. And those miners will be incredibly happy because guess what? Their power rates don't change. Their hardware cost doesn't change.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like if the fiat price goes up, like it also actually, even if they get a smaller percentage of the pie, but now that the pie is bigger, I know this, but I think also, but I do think that I don't want to blame that the price decline is caused by miners and that it's only a small part of the bigger problem, right? But obviously any bit helps, but it's just more of like, hey, I really want to try to create this community fund to start having an educated community, because right now we do have some really great contributors to the project. Like our Android and iOS wallet were developed and funded by the community, so like that's really nice, like Arcadia who did all of that. But at the same time, we want more people like that, and realistically we cannot hope for charity and people to do it on their free time. People need to be paid and rewarded for their efforts, and I do think that the community fund is a great way to start that engagement, right? Because we've been all about privacy. We can't be Ethereum, right? I don't think we should be. We are privacy tax specialists. We shouldn't be trying to play around too much with too many other stuff. That's what it is. So Vos, maybe you have some ideas as well. I don't want to make this into like a Firo thingy, but it's just like I've spoken to many other projects, even like CCX, Oxen, and a couple of others, and they have also had their own gripes with and challenges with miners as well, right? And I do feel that it's a big question of like how can GPU miners give back? How can GPU miners give back to the projects that they mine from? And it's a bit hard to answer that. That's why I just said like, look, I also don't really know exactly how you guys can contribute, but for the very start, at least try to shift your hash rate. Like that's really like free and just like a couple of clicks, right? If you can't do that, then that's a clear signal for me that you guys aren't really supporting the project. Like if you can't even do this very, very small thing, if I saw like a huge hash rate shift, decentralized, my mindset would be a lot different, because like, wow, okay, these people care, they are listening, right? So miners, if you're out there, it isn't too late. The poll hasn't completed, but the community really wants to see, not just me. Everyone's like, Ruben and the core team has been saying decentralize the hash rate, but they've done nothing. So why should we support you guys? But if you guys got together, decentralize, okay, regardless of what two miners does, it would be a very big show of support.
So what I would recommend is, I think you need to force them to make a move, even if they remake the same move. You deal with the laziness, the complacency, everything like that. I think you should force them to make a move with like a mandated client update. And again, I'm not the most technical guy, so this is where you probably link up with Christy, be like, how do you actually do this? I'm more of like, maybe I'll try to be the idea guy, right? But it's force them to make an update, force them to change their mining OS, right? A new client, tweak the algo where your stuff's not going to work. It's getting turned off. And it's not that you have to make such a substantial change. It's just literally a required update. A required update would force them to read, like you could just have a one-page post on like the status quo of like, here's the situation, guys. This is basically where we're at. You need to update. We made this change. Also, if we don't distribute this hash rate, we will be moving away from proof of work. And if you have such an in your face, basically like you have to read this or we're going to probably move away. and then they all go back to the same mining pool, I wouldn't feel bad about turning off proof of work, at least for a while. I mean, for a while it sounds wish-washy. There's a lot of different routes you can take with all of this, but
I mean, that's why we were hoping with Firo Power, right? Because I was like, oh yeah, maybe everyone's just entrenched with MTP, comfortable. Let's like do Firo Power and see how it goes.
I think that you got to get in their face. I think you got to say, like, here's the deal. I think, I mean, just my opinion, I think maybe it's a little too passive. I think you're expecting people to be more informed than they are, and maybe even care a little bit more than they do, and maybe best proposed as the dramatic all or nothing. We're not going to proceed with proof of work if we cannot decentralize our hash rate. This is a mandated update. This is your last call. We're going to reassess the network in 6 months, and if there's not a substantial change, we're going to make one. And I mean, I think you're in a difficult situation. I think your project has years. You have over half a decade under the belt. You need to force a move.